Hey guys, welcome to the shop. Today's video is on this, I guess build is a good way to put it. This Ruger M76, or M77, excuse me. I'm still thinking of the Zostava I just recorded the video on. This is actually from the same customer. Now, I think it's a really, it's a nice gun. It's obviously been carried a lot. It hasn't been fully refinished. It appears to have hand-cut checkering that's been done fairly well, I would say. You know, there's not a lot of slips. And it's got a McGowan precision barrel on. The customer seems very happy with. And I turned it down to sort of a slight hybrid of a Palma #1 in a sporter contour. Now we have the taper from this point forward is the same as a Palma #1, but the contour here I actually did by hand with a file to try and match the original look. I really wanted that smooth sporter look. I think it is aesthetically more pleasing than the sharp barrel contours. Now, per customer requests, because of the thread size on this, what actually did happen is I've left a bell end here. We didn't discuss blending it. Hindsight being what it is, I think on the next one I'll blend it. It won't add much more time, but we'll get a really cosmetically perfect build. However, that being said, based on the stock condition, I don't think cosmetics are this customer's top priority. He's all about function, and I really appreciate that. So this is a lightweight hunting gun. The goal, as I understood it, was he wanted this with the additional 7 or 9 inches of suppressor to fit in his case. So he gave me an overall length target to hit. We're under it by 3/8 of an inch. And you can actually see in the stock, I'm not 100% sure how well it shows up on video, but this is how much material we removed from the barrel channel. It is a much lighter gun than it came in as. And I'm pretty pleased with it. I think it turned out well. We test fired it just for safety. Now, any firearm I do barrel work on, period. If I remove the barrel, I test fire it. I am not comfortable shipping out any firearm where I've removed and replaced a barrel, such as this. Now, for field scripting a semi-automatic handgun would be a different story, but, you know, even assembling an AR upper, I will test fire it. I always test fire guns like this just for safety. I don't accuracy test them, but I will function test them and verify and look for issues with the chamber. Now, this particular firearm, the barrel was on extremely tight when it came to me, to the point where I was considering warming the receiver with a torch. Now, one of the issues you run into with a lot of these particularly tight receivers is it's actually very easy to twist a bolt actions receiver, which is unfortunate, and I've seen it happen. And I personally have twisted a Mauser receiver. Now, fortunately, Mauser receivers are soft enough, I was able to twist it back. And to top it off, it was a personal firearm, so it was non-issue. But that lesson has stuck clearly in my mind when working on customer guns, that you really do need the proper action wrench. And I have mixed feelings about the rear entry wrenches. Now, I don't have them here, but I don't see any fundamental issues with them, because really you don't actually need much tighter than hand tight on these barrels. With a right hand twist, every time you pull the trigger they get tighter. They're not going to unscrew themselves. I think about 25 to 30 foot-pounds has been adequate in my experience. Ruger typically does not put on barrels tighter than that in my experience. However, a lot of older military surplus firearms, for example, can come in as tight as probably 200 foot-pounds of torque to unscrew them. And these are things to know when working on these firearms, and know your limits, but also know how to loosen barrels. In this case, the strategy that worked is I put rosin and a piece of leather in between the receiver and my wrench, and I tightened down as much as I could, and I actually hit it with a hammer. That popped it loose quite quickly, but that's not the ideal method. My first choice is just put the action wrench on and remove it. Now, I have started using bushings in my hydraulic shop press actually to hold on to barrels, I find it's a lot quicker than fiddling with those screw down types. I have a Wheeler barrel vise I purchased before I started this business. I'm happy with it. I would say, I think, for a home gamer who doesn't have a lot of infrastructure but does have a good heavy vise, that works. I remove and replace barrels with that by just sticking it in the shop vise by my lathe, and it's very effective. That's how I replaced the barrel on this. I did not torque it as tight as when it had come to me because it simply didn't need to be that tight. And there's a few reasons not to. I mean, the number one is damage on removal and installation. Typically, in my experience, if a customer rebarrels a firearm once, they'll rebarrel it again in their lifetime. I've seen cases where people will put red Loctite on receiver threads. I wouldn't recommend that. Now, you know, this is a Ruger M77. They're pretty good guns. I know a lot of people don't have the warm and fuzzies about them. I find they're a little bit harder than most to inlet and bed stocks for. Now that's because there's actually an angled screw this way that's pulling the receiver down and back. Interestingly enough, similar principle as a lockdown vise, like a toolmaker's vise or the Kurt vices and its derivatives. So these are all good things to bear in mind. I've found these to be reasonably accurate shooters. The triggers are not the best on these. Now, I have a preference for about 3.5 to 4.5 pound triggers on hunting rifles. That is what I see in this. It doesn't have a super top-notch trigger. That is what it is. I'm also not comfortable doing trigger jobs on these as I'm not deeply familiar with their mechanics. Beyond just looking at them, removing burrs, and cleaning and oiling, I generally don't think there's a lot of room for improvement in most triggers made after 1990, at least designed and launched on market after 1990. That's just my personal opinion. Timney does make aftermarket triggers for these. But before we talk your ear off, I think we'll call it a day. I'm with customer permission, I'm doing some videos on some of the more interesting stuff that comes through the shop, just because it is fun to talk about. It's fun to look at some of the mechanics of these things together. And it's also really interesting to share what people are doing. I think we as consumers and gunsmiths have a very narrow view of what custom gunsmithing is. And I see a lot of people doing very disparate things because of their personal preferences that don't necessarily fall into what we think of as normal gunsmithing work. So it's fun, like this project here, you know, a chopped down 300 Win Mag isn't what you normally think of, but it does achieve a very specific goal for this customer. And that is a huge part of what gunsmithing is meeting goals for customers because they can't get an off-the-shelf solution. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed.